In the back ledgers of Virginia plantations between 1832 and 1861, names appear with careful penmanship. Birth years are marked. Parentage is noted. Work assignments begin early. But then, at the age of 12, the lines go blank. No sale price. No transfer stamp. No burial notation. Just silence. For decades, historians dismissed it as clerical neglect. Plantation owners were careless, after all. Paper rotted. Ink faded. Memory failed. But memory was not what failed here. Because the same thing happened again. And again. And again. Different counties. Different plantations. Different churches. Yet always the same age. 12. In Norfolk. In Hanover. In Louisa County. Children who reached 12 vanished without economic explanation. No profit motive. No punishment record. No public execution. No escape notices posted. And the parents, enslaved mothers and fathers, were never informed. They were simply told their child had been reassigned. Where? No answer. Those who asked too many questions were separated, sold south, or transferred to road crews where death arrived quietly. By the 1840s, enslaved families whispered about the counting year. The year when a child's voice might be heard for the last time. The year when church attendance stopped including certain faces. White congregations, meanwhile, preached loudly about purity, about order, about saving souls before corruption set in. They never explained what corruption meant. They never explained why age 12 mattered. And they never explained why orphan houses, seminaries, and benevolent institutions expanded at precisely the same rate children disappeared. This is not a story about chains. This is a story about systems, about paperwork, faith, education, and righteousness used as camouflage. And it begins with a ledger discovered in 1919, where someone had written, in trembling ink, "They are not gone. They are kept." In the summer of 1919, a courthouse renovation in rural Virginia uncovered a sealed wooden chest hidden behind a collapsed wall. Inside were tax receipts, baptismal logs, and one ledger that had never been officially cataloged. Its cover bore no title, only a symbol, 3 interlocking circles, pressed faintly into the leather. The ledger did not list sales. It listed intakes. Each page contained a child's first name only, an age, a physical description, and a final column labeled simply, condition. Under condition were words that did not belong in any economic system. Compliant, unsettled, observant, resistant to instruction. Most disturbing of all, every entry ended the same way. Removed from origin. No destination. No return date. The ledger spanned nearly 50 years. And every child listed was 12. Clerks who reviewed the document reported nausea. Not because of violence, but because of intent. The handwriting was careful. The language precise. Whoever recorded this did not see children. They saw material. Cross-referencing plantation records revealed something worse. None of these children appeared in sale logs. They had not entered the slave market at all, which meant they had been taken outside the economy. Someone had claimed them without payment. Someone with authority higher than money. When investigators attempted to trace the symbol on the ledger's cover, they found it carved into the foundation stones of several abandoned church schools, institutions that had advertised themselves as moral academies for the improvement of society. These schools had no graduation records, no alumni, no photographs of students, only sermons. Sermons about obedience, silence, renewal. One sermon ended with a line repeated across decades. The 12th year is the threshold. Beyond it, the soul must be shaped or sealed. The ledger was quietly refiled. The chest was removed, and the symbol was classified as decorative. But the children's names remained, waiting. On Sundays, the pews were full. Black congregations sang hymns heavy with grief. White congregations spoke of order, destiny, and divine hierarchy. And between them stood churches that served both, segregated by seating, united by silence. No minister ever publicly asked where the children went. Not once. In fact, church attendance records reveal something chilling. The disappearance of 12-year-old children coincided perfectly with confirmation seasons, periods when spiritual readiness was evaluated. Age 12 was described in sermons as the age of discernment, the age when a soul could either be guided or corrected. Some ministers kept private journals. Most were destroyed. A few survived. One entry, dated 1847, reads. The younger ones still ask questions. This must be resolved before curiosity matures. Another states, removal spares the community confusion. No scripture is cited. No mercy invoked. Just procedure. Church-run orphan houses expanded during these same decades, often accepting children without parents' consent, justified by vague claims of moral danger. Danger to whom? The buildings themselves were strange, windowless upper floors, locked dormitories, basements not listed on blueprints. Former maintenance workers later testified to hearing chanting during evening hours, not hymns, but repetitive instructions spoken in unison. The children were not beaten. They were unmade. Names replaced with numbers. Family history erased. Speech corrected until accents vanished. And always, the same promise was made to overseers and clergy alike. What is taken will return improved, or not at all. No graves were found. No escapees ever spoke. And no adult ever emerged who remembered being 12 in those places. Enslaved mothers noticed patterns long before historians did. They noticed that children taken at 12 never sent word. That clothing was not returned. That lullabies stopped echoing through quarters where a child had once slept. Some women carved marks into trees, one notch for every child lost. Others memorized names, passing them orally like prayers, refusing to let silence win. One woman, recorded only as Miriam, was known to whisper to empty beds at night. She claimed the children were not dead, but held in rooms without time. Plantation owners dismissed this as grief madness. But Miriam made a prediction. She said that one day, the ground beneath the churches would collapse, that what was hidden would surface, not as bodies, but as truth too heavy to bury. She was sold shortly after. Yet similar testimonies appear across counties. Mothers dreaming of hallways, locked doors, and voices reciting lessons endlessly. Not torture. Education. A shaping so thorough it erased the self. The greatest horror was not what happened to the children. It was that the system worked so well no one remembered them afterward. Even grief faded. And that, perhaps, was the final step. 12 is not arbitrary. It is the age of separation in many traditions. The age of religious responsibility. The age when questioning begins, and obedience can still be enforced. Documents from the period describe 12 as pliable, old enough to understand rules, young enough to accept them as absolute. The institutions that took these children believed something dangerous. That identity was a flaw. That memory was a disease. And that society could be perfected by removing those who might one day remember too much. The children were not killed. They were converted into something untraceable. And Virginia kept finding them missing, because they were never meant to be found. They did not call them prisons. They did not call them schools. Official records referred to them only as houses of instruction. No addresses were listed. Only distances from known landmarks. 3 miles past the river bend, beyond the third bell tower, where the soil darkens. Survey maps from the 1800s show blank spaces where buildings clearly existed. Roads that lead nowhere. Trails that abruptly end. These institutions were deliberately erased from geography. Inside, discipline was not enforced through pain, but through repetition. Former clerical notes described daily schedules broken into identical segments. Recitation, correction, silence, observation. Children were required to repeat phrases aloud until pronunciation, rhythm, and emotion matched precisely. Individuality was described as a symptom. The goal was not obedience, it was absence. One document refers to the process as stilling. Another calls it the quiet harvest. There are no references to release, only progress reports. And progress was measured not by learning, but by how little of the child remained. Plantation owners signed away children with unusual paperwork. The same man would sign once as a property holder, and again as a church trustee. This dual authority allowed transfers to occur without sale. No money changed hands. No public ledger was triggered. Legally, the child had never moved. Spiritually, the child had been claimed. In letters between trustees, language becomes disturbingly ritualistic. The offering has reached maturity. The threshold is crossed willingly or otherwise. Some plantation owners refused. Their plantations were audited within months. Accidents followed. Fires, bank failures, illnesses without cause. Resistance was corrected. By the 1850s, compliance was near total. The system did not rely on cruelty. It relied on fear disguised as righteousness. Census records from post-Civil War Virginia contain anomalies. Entire age groups missing. No 12-year-olds becoming 13. No 13-year-olds becoming adults. Demographers assumed death, migration, or record loss. But when modern researchers overlaid church transfer logs, orphan house intake records, and plantation birth registers, the pattern emerged. Children disappeared, but no adults appeared to replace them. They did not grow up. They did not resettle. They did not remember, which raises a terrifying possibility. Whatever happened in those institutions did not end at childhood. It interrupted time. A journal recovered from a defunct seminary contains a chilling line. The still ones do not age as others do. They remain useful. Useful for what is never explained. In 1931, a junior archivist named Edwin Clark noticed the pattern. He filed a report. 2 weeks later, his access was revoked. A month later, his notes were missing. 3 months later, Clark resigned, citing health. He never spoke publicly again. But in a private letter found decades later, Clark wrote, "It is not a crime ring. It is not trafficking. It is belief made administrative." He warned that the system had outlived slavery, that it no longer required chains. Only paperwork. No survivor has ever come forward. But something else has. Local folklore speaks of people with no childhood memories. Adults unable to recall their parents' names. Individuals who avoid churches without knowing why. They are not broken. They are empty in specific places. Places where identity once lived. And Virginia keeps finding the gaps. Because the system did not end. It learned to hide better. By the late 1800s, the institutions began to disappear. Not all at once. Quietly. Methodically. 1 year, a school closed due to funding. Another year, an orphan house was relocated. A seminary burned down under circumstances never investigated. Yet decades later, surveyors reported something unsettling. Foundations still existed where no buildings were supposed to have ever stood. Basements without upper structures. Staircases leading into earth. Cellars with chalk markings that could not be washed away. Local workers refused to excavate these sites. Not out of superstition, but discomfort. They described a sensation of being observed, even when alone. One foreman quit after finding rows of identical stools bolted to the floor of an underground chamber. No restraints. No beds. No decorations. Just places to sit. Facing a wall. The wall itself was polished smooth, as if countless hands had rested there over time. No remains were discovered. No evidence of violence. Only architecture designed for duration, not confinement. For waiting. Recovered lesson manuals reveal the core philosophy. Children were not taught skills. They were taught responses. Every question had a permitted answer. Every emotion had an approved expression. Silence was rewarded. Memory, however, was treated as a flaw. Repeated drills focused on detachment from personal history. Your name was given. It can be returned. Your past is noise. You are improved when you are unburdened. These phrases appear across multiple documents, written by different hands, decades apart, which suggests coordination or inheritance. The instructors believed they were perfecting something ancient, removing what they called the residue of origin. Not race, not class, but attachment. A child without attachment could be reshaped indefinitely. And reshaping, they believed, was mercy. After the Civil War, investigations were promised. None were completed. Records vanished into private collections. Witnesses died conveniently. Buildings were sold, rezoned, or collapsed. The system did not fight exposure. It waited it out. Because it had learned something crucial. Truth requires memory. And memory had already been harvested. By the time the questions were asked, the people who could answer them no longer knew what they had lost. Even the parents, decades later, could not fully describe the children taken from them. Not because they didn't love them, but because something had slowly erased the sharp edges of remembrance. Grief dulled. Faces blurred. Names slipped. That was the system's greatest success. Virginia was not unique. Similar gaps appear in other states. Other decades. Other institutions. Different labels. Same structure. The age varied slightly. The language evolved. The goal remained constant. Remove the moment when questioning begins. Intervene before identity stabilizes. Preserve order by preventing memory. This was not a conspiracy. It was a philosophy embedded into systems that outlived the people who created them. And it still echoes. The children were not stolen for labor, not for profit, not even for cruelty. They were taken to protect a fragile system, one that could not survive scrutiny. Children ask questions. 12 is the age when questions sharpen. So the questions were removed. What remains is not a graveyard, but a silence that spans generations. And Virginia keeps finding it. In records that end too early. In families missing chapters. In people who feel incomplete and never know why. The final recorded House of Instruction closed in 1898. Officially, it was due to irrelevance. Privately, it was because its purpose had already been fulfilled. By then, the methods no longer required buildings. The institution had become procedural. Training manuals were condensed. Language softened. The same principles were absorbed into schools, churches, reformatories, and later, bureaucracies. The goal was no longer to remove children. It was to remove questions. The last superintendent wrote a farewell letter to his successors. You will not need walls. Only rules. You will not need silence. Only repetition. The building was dismantled. The foundation was buried. But the philosophy was preserved. Investigators once asked the wrong question. Where did the children go? The correct question was, what were the children turned into? They were not killed. They were converted into compliant adults with no memory of resistance. Into workers who did not question systems. Into congregants who obeyed without inquiry. Into citizens who felt unease, but could not name its source. No graves were needed. Because the children never ended. They simply continued without themselves. This is why no remains were ever found. The system did not dispose of bodies. It disposed of identity. Even now, Virginia's records contain absences. Social workers note family histories with missing generations. Therapists encounter patients with inexplicable emotional voids. Archivists find files that stop mid-sentence. Not erased, just unfinished. The same age still appears in modern studies. The same threshold. 12. The age when curiosity peaks. When belief can still override reason. When authority can replace memory. The system no longer needs secrecy. It survives openly. Because it learned the most important lesson of all. If you remove the ability to remember injustice, you never need to hide it. The enslaved mothers were right. The children were not dead. They were kept. Kept in patterns. Kept in habits. Kept in silences passed down like heirlooms. Their warning was never about revenge. It was about inheritance. They knew that what was done to their children would echo forward, reshaping families, communities, and nations. They knew the cost would not be visible. Because the most effective systems of harm never look violent. They look normal. In a margin of the original ledger, barely legible, is a final note written decades after the last entry. Different ink. Different hand. It reads, "We succeeded because no one wanted to remember." Virginia kept finding the missing children because history kept tripping over the same absence. A silence too precise to be accidental. A gap too consistent to ignore. And once you see it, you will notice it everywhere.